So John Hicks, he's that freedom, freedom, freedom guy. Just all he talks about, freedom, freedom, freedom. You know. Okay, that's actually a good thing. So John Hicks is the Libertarian and the candidate for Kentucky's governor's race 2019. The Libertarians are the only political organization in Kentucky right now, so they're moving on up. You got the two-party system, the two-party entrenched system, and the Libertarians now, they're not just an association, they're an organization, which means they can be on the general ballot, but not in the primary. In order to get in the primary, you gotta move on up a little bit more. So the Libertarian candidate actually had a challenge in court, and on May 9th, 2019, in a federal court in Cincinnati, the Libertarians had won their case, so they will definitely be on the ballot in November. I'm not for sure if the Socialist Workers Party, Amy Husk, has got on the ballot or not, but you do have a third option. You do have a Libertarian choice on top of the Republican and Democrat when it comes to the November election, Kentucky, so make sure to check out John Hicks. John Hicks is very impressive, very smart, and he's Libertarian, which is, if you like a right-wing radical, then the Libertarians are radical, but they're not authoritarian. So they'll probably agree with many of your viewpoints if you're, if you believe in freedom, freedom, freedom. But if you're not a big freedom, freedom, freedom person, the legal challenge, and this just shows you the dirty politics of Kentucky. So the Secretary of State, the government, the two-party system, they went ahead and moved the early registration. You had to file some sort of statement of intent for candidacy. That's the first step to running for governor in Kentucky. And you're supposed to do it before it was April 1st. But in March, they went ahead and backdated it back to January. So that's clear discrimination. In March, you're going to pass something saying that you should have registered 3 months ago, even though the registration deadline, which was the 1st of April. So the federal court in Cincinnati agreed with the Libertarians, and so after the Libertarians sued the Secretary of State to get on the ballot, they were successful. So again, you will have three choices at least if the Socialist Workers Party isn't able to get on there when it comes for the general election for governor 2019. So John Hicks has a pretty extensive biography. He's thoughtful, he's intelligent, and I think you should give him a look, and I think you should give him, all due deference that you would give any other candidate. So he's an IT technician. He was drafted into the Vietnam War. He's a political science major, Stetson University in Louisville, had a community newspaper, lives in Louisville, public school teacher. John Hicks is intelligent when it comes to computer designs and software. John Hicks uses Linux. He's a huge fan of open source. In fact, he runs a local open source meetup group called the Kentucky Open Source Society, KYOSS. He has an extensive amount of software languages. So in addition to speaking English, he also knows Honeywell and IBM Assembler, COBOL, C and C++, Java, PHP, JavaScript, Bash, SQL, a little Python, HTML, CSS, of course. He's edited over 100 Wikipedia articles, and he also speaks Spanish very well because he lived in South Florida for a decade. So being a Libertarian, he believes in freedom, right? He's a freedom, freedom, freedom guy. And so being a freedom, freedom, freedom guy, he's opposed to the war on drugs, especially marijuana, which is the opposite of Matt Bevin, because we have a right to our own bodies. He's also for legalized prostitution, and I'll assume he's pro-gay marriage and pro-casinos, that it should be legal. He's not a champion in any of these ideas, but he just believes that it should be legal because as adults, we should have the right to do what we want with our own bodies. John Hicks is also opposed to child abuse, including corporal punishment. That's assault. Jeff Young pointed out that Hitler's tyrannical father is what caused many of Hitler's problems. So the government needs to be careful about intervening on that. He sets the parameters up as children's rights versus parents' rights. John Hicks believes that parents have a right to raise their kids how they see fit, but he also believes that children have rights too. He believes in instant runoff voting. He says that we need ranked choice voting first to end the spoiler effect. He says for single-member districts, that's the first step that we need. He talks about Maine implementing IRV. The final solution for him is proportional representation, single transferable vote. He says, right now we can vote a protest vote to disrupt the system, so therefore third parties are relevant because they can swing the election, so you can wake folks up that way. And then when he says if he wins, if lightning strikes, so he realizes his uphill battle, he's essentially walking up a mountain during an avalanche. He was drafted into the Vietnam War, and at the time he did his duty, so he was a proud soldier. When he takes a look back upon it, he is opposed to all of it. He's opposed to the draft that drafted him, and then he felt that most wars, like Vietnam, most wars are useless. So he believes that the U.S. has a bad habit of meddling, intervening, does more harm than good. So he's opposed to the draft. He's opposed to all these military interventions. He believes that the use of military power creates resentment all over the world. And then he also points out that we never read about the fatalities of those that we invade. You hear about the American fatalities, but you don't hear about the Iraqi fatalities or the Vietnamese the fatalities. So in order to win over the world, John Hicks believes that in order to win the war of ideas, that ideas should be able to stand up on their own volition. You don't need to force people to believe what you believe by the point of a bayonet. On social spending, he doesn't want to get rid of the social safety net. So he actually has a balance when it comes to how much competition versus how much cooperation we have in our society. He stays away from capitalism and socialism, those words, but he believes in a balance between cooperation and competition. So he was talking about UBI. He said that UBI would help with wages. UBI would drive up wages, but he's a little worried about the unintended consequences, so he's skeptical. He was reading Benjamin Disraeli's Civil on inequity. He says that folks are jealous of wealthy folks, but really, if we worked on having simpler lives, we would be happy and we would be free. So as long as you're free, do you really need, billions and billions of dollars? He also points out that there are folks who are trapped in poverty, so they can't really act freely. They have political freedom, but they're not economically free, and so that holds people down. He wants better, satisfying jokes. He wants jobs. He wants better, satisfying jobs for folks. So there's lots of crap jobs out there, but he wants to, for folks to do what they enjoy and get paid for it. He's opposed to crony capitalism. He believes he's opposed to monopolies. When it comes to laissez-faire kind of economic system where just the free market reigns, he believes that there should be some level of government to make sure that there's no fraud in the market. He believes in freedom, and you don't want to regulate free speech, but he believes that a lot of times these capitalist institutions, he didn't use those words, but he says these entrenched institutions drive out competition. So they become monopolies, and he's against crony capitalism. He's against monopolies. So he's not such a purist that he would only advocate for a laissez-faire capitalist market, but he wants to make sure that there's no fraud in the market. So he believes in order to stop the corporations from being fraudulent, you need a little bit of government. John Hicks agrees that yard sales should be legal and free. So if we're truly a capitalist society, then we should be allowed to have yard sales. He's not socialist, he's not a capitalist, he steers away from both words. He says he believes in both cooperation and competition. So he even points out that the free market can be a cooperative mechanism. When different corporations and companies get together, they can be cooperative. So cooperative and competition are independent of socialist and capitalist. John Hicks, surprisingly, opposes the right to work laws. The right to work laws are the right to break up a closed shop. So John Hicks believes that an employer and a group of employees can sign a contract. The reason why I know all this is I did an interview with John Hicks, and so these are the policy points that he had spoke of. So he thinks it's okay to have a closed shop if the employer and a group of employees sign a contract that only the union can be hired. So the employer signed the contract with a group of employees, so that's, free association, then you cannot break up that contract. It is okay for them to, so he believes in the right to contract. John Hicks says that Matt Bevin's biggest problem is his mouth. He says that's also the same problem with Donald Trump. He thinks the difference between Donald and Matt Bevin is that Donald knows that he's putting on a show, but Matt Bevin actually believes what he says. And he also believes that the media misses Bevin's point when they're beating up on him. In general, John Hicks believes that Matt Bevin has been pro-liberty. On abortion, John Hicks believes that it is a tough issue. He says there's the right to the privacy of the mother versus the right to the life of the fetus. So he believes there needs to be a balance. He defers his opinion on abortion, however, to womankind. He does say that men's opinion on abortion are important too, but essentially he believes this is a woman's issue. And overall, he doesn't believe that government should get involved. On carried concealed, the carried concealed law that Matt Bevin passed in general, he's in favor of it because gun confiscation will turn us all into slaves. On vaccinations, he's pro-science. So that which science has on vaccinations, where science has proved that they're good, they stop you from having a disease, for the rest of your life. He likes vaccinations. So just like Jeff Young is generally pro-vaccinations. He's got his shots. He, likes them, but he doesn't believe that the government should make them mandatory. He believes that it should be voluntary. So he's okay with the schools enforcing vaccine policies to protect the children, but he doesn't believe that government should have a general policy for the masses. So he talked about the MMR vaccine. He was born before the MMR vaccine, and he believes that actually getting sick makes us stronger. So he believes in nature's vaccine too. He's got the hepatitis B vaccine. So when it comes to the MMR vaccine, he said that measles and mumps is essentially like a little flu, like a chicken pox. You're sick for a few days and then you're better. So your own immune system had strengthening itself without a vaccine. But with MMR, he had heard that the rubella was the biggest problem, right? Measles, mumps, rubella, MMR. So rubella is German measles, and he had read that it hurts women later on in life if they don't get the vaccination. So he's in favor of science. He's in favor of all the approved vaccinations that have worked, but he doesn't believe that government should make them mandatory, though he does believe it's okay for schools to make them mandatory. So when it comes to the prison rates, many folks are in jail because of drugs. He would release all the nonviolent offenders. When it comes to the prison rates, John Hicks knows that the United States locks up more people per capita, percentage-wise, than the entire world, including the, human rights destroying China. So we have more people in our prisons than China. So he recognizes that. John Hicks, he said specifically when it came to the prisons, since he's opposed to the war on drugs, that all low-level, nonviolent offenders will be released, which includes low-level, nonviolent drug offenders, especially marijuana charges. John Hicks, everybody. What a great last name, too. John Hicks for Kentucky. Come on, you Hicks. Vote for Hicks. And when he points out the problems of the high prison rates, he points out the two problems. First, you got the private prisons, and he's for outsourcing and privatizing services and goods wherever you can, but he believes when it comes to the private prison industry, you're incentivizing capturing folks. So he doesn't want more people to be in prison. He doesn't want the prisons to make a bunch of money. He wants overall less prisons, not more. He wants to close the prisons down if we're able to do so. So he wants to make sure that they can reform and that they get their humanity back and that they get back into society. Just to lock somebody up for the rest of their life. He wants less prisons, not more. He also points out that there's a lot of corruption in the judicial system. So when it comes to the court systems, if you can't afford a lawyer, you're fucked. He said stuck, but that's the point, right? So if you don't have a lawyer, well, you're fucked. So a lot of poor folks can't afford lawyers, and so if they're accused of a crime, they might just get convicted, not because they're guilty, but because they're poor. So he believes in judicial reform, and he also believes that private prisons, he doesn't believe in private prisons. So the Libertarians, again, had to get on the ballot. The state of Kentucky, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you can get on the ballot for governor with just 3 signatures. So you're a Kentuckian, you've been living in Kentucky for, 15 years or some residency requirements, but if you hit the residency requirements and the age requirement and you get 3 signatures, then you're on the ballot. With Libertarians and the third parties, you have to get on the ballot with 5,000 signatures, so that's a much higher threshold. So that essentially keeps a lot of independents out. So the Libertarians, because Gary Johnson, he was a Libertarian candidate for president, since he had done well in Kentucky, I think he was over 1%. Now the Libertarians are a political organization. So you have 3 levels of political organizations. You got political party, political organization, and political association. So they moved up from association to organization, but they're not yet a major political party. So the Libertarians are getting bigger and bigger. They can get on the general election, but they can't get on the state primary yet. Now ultimately, John Hicks doesn't really think, it wouldn't cost a single thing for the Libertarians to be able to get on the state primary, because it's, all the election machines are electronic. So all you have to do is just put the name on the ballot. So he does believe that the Libertarians should have more of a political say-so, but for right now, they're on the general election ballot. They're able to win that court case, so they're going to be on the ballot in real quick overview. Overall, he believes the 2-party system is fucking up everything. Again, that's me paraphrasing. He didn't cuss, but he finds the 2-party system is a monopoly, and he's a Libertarian because he believes in freedom, freedom, freedom. He wants to work on the prison rates by being opposed to private prisons, and also to have judicial reform, because if you can't afford a lawyer, then you don't get any justice. He's pro-science on vaccinations. He believes in vaccinations, but doesn't think they should be mandatory for the masses, though the school system can pass vaccine policies to save the kids. He believes in carried concealed. He thinks that abortion is a tough issue, but ultimately the government shouldn't get involved. So he defers his opinion on abortion to womankind. He does approve of Matt Bevin in general. He says that he's been pro-liberty. He opposes the right to work laws, however. If a closed shop wants to sign a contract with their employer, then the government should not get involved with that right to contract, that inviolable right to contract. He thinks that Matt Bevin's biggest problem is his mouth. He thinks that yard sales should be legal and free. He believes in both cooperation and competition. He's not going to get rid of the social safety net, not right off the bat. He's opposed to crony capitalism. When it comes to laissez-faire economics, he believes that there should be no fraud in the market. So he's for free markets, but he also wants to make sure that there aren't monopolies and institutions that are running out competition. He's very thoughtful when it comes to UBI. He was considering if UBI may be good. He does say that it will help with wages. It will help with working people's wages. Wages will go up if UBI is passed. That's a national issue. So he's a little worried, though. He's skeptical about the unintended consequences. So he couldn't say yes or no, even though it seemed like he generally liked, what UBI was about. He liked Benjamin Disraeli's book called Civil, and it's just talking about how folks get jealous of wealthy folks, but ultimately, by living a simple life, you can be happier and freer. So he was in the Vietnam War. He was drafted, and today, after reflecting upon it, he's opposed to compulsory service, and he's also, he doesn't like a lot of the military interventions that have happened throughout the world. He wants more democracy for Kentucky. He believes in instant runoff voting. Instant runoff voting is ranked voting, so you get to rank the choices. This ends the spoiler effect, so people want to blame third parties for doing this or doing that. If you passed instant runoff voting, you would actually have a fair election. Without a fair election, well, shit, the whole goddamn system is, fucked and corrupt. So he says first he wants instant runoff voting. He wants these ranked choice elections, but ultimately the final solution is single transferable vote, a proportional representation kind of system. He's opposed to child abuse and corporal punishment. He's opposed to corporal punishment. He's opposed to child abuse. He's opposed to the war on drugs. John Hicks, he is in favor of liberty. He's in favor of freedom. So he's okay with legalizing prostitution. He's okay with pro-gay marriage, pro-casinos, that it should be legal, not that he's championing them. And he's okay with drugs. So he believes that we're adults and we have a right to our own bodies. I want to mention just one more time all these computer software languages that John Hicks knows about. John Hicks knows Linux. He's a big fan of open source. He has a local open source meetup group, KYOSS, the Kentucky Open Source Society. Honeywell and IBM Assembler is one of the computer languages, software languages that he knows. He also knows COBOL, COBOL, C, C++, which are two different languages, C and C++, Java, PHP, JavaScript, Bash, SQL, some Python, HTML, and CSS. He's edited over 100 Wikipedia articles, and he knows Spanish. So when I think about his software knowledge, when I think about his, IT tech knowledge, he can, develop lots of software, lots of websites. He would understand this. When it comes to Russian hackers, I think he would have a better understanding of it. So extremely accomplished man, extremely intelligent, very smart when it comes to computers and technology. So I think Matt Bevin has his work cut out for him when it comes to defeating John Hicks in the general election, especially if the Democrats choose somebody weak like Rocky Atkins. I forgot one more very important issue. He also believes in school choice. So I think that he is actually very balanced on so many issues. You got some people that just say the public education is the only way, it's the best way, it's the greatest way, we should never, it's a monopoly, and it's totalitarian, and it's failing. You have all the problems that you have in Kentucky because the public system sucks. This public school system sucks. And I was valedictorian, so I'm one of the best of what you all got. So you want to sit there and say that you're against school choice, you're against charter schools? I think he says he believes in charter schools and he believes in school choice. I like vouchers, so I asked him about vouchers. He says he's generally in favor of vouchers, but again, he remains skeptical about how it's being implemented. But I like vouchers so much because it gives you the chance to send it to a private school, charter school, or to send it to the public education. If the public education has to fight for the tax dollars, it has to fight for those dollars from the parents and the kids, then we're the customer, which means we're in charge. You don't give us a good education, then you don't get paid. We get $10,000 is how much the government gives to these school systems. $10,000 to $20,000. You don't want